Princess Leonor, the perfume she uses. A corridor opens before dawn. Stone cooled by centuries, light filtered through tall windows that have watched empires thin and reform. A young figure moves through it without sound, accompanied by protocol more than people. The air is clean, neutral, intentionally so, not sweetness, not indulgence, control. This is how presence is introduced before a word is spoken. Princess Leonor is not taught to express herself first. She is taught to arrive correctly. And arrival, in institutions that survive centuries, includes what cannot be seen. Even scent becomes discipline, because for Princess Leonor, identity is never personal first, but institutional. Monarchies understand something modern power often overlooks. The body communicates before language does. Posture, pace, silence, and yes, trace. Nothing sharp, nothing memorable enough to cling. The goal is not recognition. It is reassurance. 2 minutes in, the assumption quietly fractures. This is not about fragrance at all. It is about erasure of the self. In royal households, excess is instability. What lingers too long invites interpretation. And interpretation invites fracture. National identity is woven into these rituals. Spain's monarchy learned this through survival. After rupture, after transition, after consensus built on restraint, every visible and invisible detail was recalibrated to signal continuity. Even the smallest sensory note is regulated, not for vanity, but for legitimacy. The heir does not announce herself. She blends into the architecture of the state. Because what it really means is absence. Absence of ego, absence of preference, absence of unpredictability. In the United States, power often brands itself. In the United Kingdom, tradition perfumes continuity with familiarity. Canada and Australia read restraint as reliability. Germany, more than most, understands the danger of symbols that overpower substance. Here, scent is designed not to dominate a room, but to leave it unchanged. This is the living thread of continuity. Behind closed doors, these details are never trivial. They are discussed the same way tone, gesture, and timing are discussed. What endures is what does not provoke. At 8 minutes, the deeper mystery emerges. No official confirmation, no public acknowledgement, no denial. Because the truth is not which perfume is used, but that the choice is never entirely hers. Preference yields to protocol. Personal inclination dissolves into institutional necessity. This is how the roll closes in. Quietly, completely. Around 10 minutes, the stakes sharpen. Spain does not require its future monarch to be adored. It requires her to be uncontested. Anything that personalizes too much becomes a liability. A scent remembered too clearly becomes ownership of space. Ownership suggests dominance. Dominance unsettles. Continuity is not abstract here, it is embodied in visible presence and invisible restraint. At 14 minutes, the point of no return becomes unavoidable. There is no moment where the private self reclaims ground. The longer the preparation, the less space remains. This is not sacrifice in the dramatic sense. It is absorption. By 19 minutes, the future pressure line comes into view. A world impatient with inherited authority. A public more sensitive to symbolism than ever before. Institutions that survive only if they appear lighter than they are. Scent, once again, becomes strategy. Unnoticeable, unprovoking, unchallenged. Allies watch without comment. Markets register calm without knowing why. History nods, because it recognizes the pattern. And in the final moments, we return to the phrase that was never really about perfume. It smells like restraint, like discipline learned early, like a future already narrowing into form. The corridor is still quiet, the air unchanged, and the story, unmistakably, unfinished. The restraint does not relax with time. It deepens. As Princess Leonor moves closer to visibility, the margins narrow further. What once felt like training becomes environment. What once felt optional becomes assumed. This is how institutions colonize the senses. Nothing about presence is allowed to suggest appetite. Not for attention, not for affection, not for individuality. The body becomes an instrument of state. In monarchies that endure, discretion is not aesthetic. It is defensive architecture. Spain understands that legitimacy today is fragile not because it is attacked, but because it is examined. Every detail becomes evidence. Every deviation invites interpretation. Scent, then, is governed like language. It must say nothing, and in saying nothing, it must say everything. At this stage, the international reading intensifies. In Washington, neutrality signals reliability. In London, understatement signals lineage. Canada and Australia read continuity in calm. Germany reads discipline, and recognizes it immediately. No one comments on what they cannot detect. That is the point. The deeper tension is no longer about control. It is about permanence. What happens when an institution requires its future to be imperceptible? At moments of public closeness, greetings, ceremonies, diplomatic proximity, the design holds no trace to remember, no impression to claim, only presence that dissolves back into structure. This is not coldness. It is strategy. The monarchy does not want to be felt. It wants to be accepted. And acceptance, at scale, depends on predictability. As years pass, the discipline becomes self-sustaining. The role no longer needs enforcement. It governs from within. This is where the cost becomes visible only in absence. Absence of spontaneity. Absence of private markers. Absence of anything that could be interpreted as preference over principle. At the horizon, pressure gathers. A generation less patient with symbols. A political climate quicker to question inherited authority. A world that confuses visibility with legitimacy. The response is not adaptation through expression. It is survival through restraint. Scent remains the smallest example, and the clearest. If even this must disappear, nothing else will be allowed to dominate. The institution breathes through her. Quietly, carefully, and so the air remains unchanged. Which is precisely the intention. What comes next will test whether silence can still hold. History has not answered that yet.